Today's daf that we're learning today is daf Kuf Zayin. One of my, as I said yesterday, one of my favorite dafim in the Gemara, as you'll see. Probably won't do it as short as the last few days, just because there's a lot of interesting things off the daf that I want to get into. Today's daf is sponsored in celebration of Jerry Goldstein's birthday by her kids Audrey and Jake Levant and Michael and Stacy Goldstein. Your camera's off, but we know you're there. Happy birthday to Jerry's iPhone. And by Inbal in honor of her husband Gadi, who's been teaching me about life for 25 years and who I've enjoyed learning the daf with over the past year. Okay, we are going to start at the very top. We're in the middle of a topic. We wanted to know, are you penalized if you eat before Kiddush or eat before Havdalah? Do we penalize you and not let you? And now fill in the blank. It's not clear what we don't let you do. For sure, we don't let you make Kiddush or Havdalah that day. You have to wait till the next day. The question is, does it also mean that you can't eat at all until you do? So it's not really such a big deal whether we explain it that way or that way, because in the end, Amarava Hilchata, the halacha is ta'am mekadesh v'ta'am mavdil. If you ate, we let you do Kiddush. And if you ate, we let you do Havdalah. Okay. Actually, I can't remember now. I just remembered that last class, I skipped a line. I can't remember if it was with the English or the Hebrew, but I want to go back because I skipped a line in one of the classes. In the middle of Kuf Vav Amubet, when I started accidentally with Ta'am Maushi Avdil, but Rav Huna Amar Rav, and there were two things in the name. There was first, Rav Huna said the name of Rav Ta'am Einoma Kadesh. If you eat, you can't do Kiddush. And then Ba'amine Rav Chana Barchinin Amar Rav Huna Ta'am Maushi Avdil. And then he asked Rav Huna, well, what about Havdalah? Okay, and then we saw in general, there were different opinions. Anyway, I skipped a line, I think, yesterday. So there it is now, I filled it in. And actually, so now we have this issue. According to the halacha, it doesn't matter Kiddush, it doesn't matter Havdalah. In other words, yesterday was this whole discussion, do we distinguish between them or not? Here we say we don't penalize you at all. And additionally, when it comes to the halacha, if you didn't make Kiddush on Erev Shabbat, mekadesh v'holech kol hayom kulo ad Motzei Shabbat. Okay, you can do Kiddush all day long until Motzei Shabbat. Okay, in other words, meaning you have all of Shabbat to fill it in. Okay, if you missed it, you get makeup time. This is like tashluming in davening. You forget shacharit, you can make it up in mincha. So there's an end time, which is once Shabbat is over, obviously it makes no sense to say Kiddush, but you could say it. So what would that mean? We say Kiddush anyway on Shabbos, but again, Shabbos is different Kiddush. The Shabbat day Kiddush is only Ber Pregap, and so you would basically say Mekadesh Shabbat when you say Kiddush on Shabbat morning. Mishalo Avdil b'Motzei Shabbat. And by the way, you could also not necessarily do it in the morning. You could do it even in the afternoon, according to this. Mishalo Avdil b'Motzei Shabbat. If you didn't make Havdalah on Saturday night, what do you get to do? Mavdil v'holech kol Shabbat kulo. So this is a basic summary and paskening halacha. This is what Rava says you do. You get the whole week, which really we already explained doesn't really mean the whole week. It means you get till Tuesday, up until Tuesday night, basically Tuesday afternoon. Ameimar patach lalahashmata de Rava b'hai lishna. Ameimar opened up this whole, he taught this whole thing really. Patach is open, but he didn't really open. He taught what Rava said in a different way. If you don't pay very close attention, you're going to miss it because there's only one minor detail that's different. He said that what Rava said was not what we just said. Ella Amar Rava hilchata ta'am mekadesh v'ta'am avdil. So far the same. We don't penalize you if you ate. You can still say Kiddush and you can still say Havdalah. Mi shelo kiddush ve'erev Shabbat mekadesh v'holech kol hayom kulo. And anyone who make skip Kiddush Friday night can do it the whole day. This is the same. But here comes the minor difference. But if you didn't make Havdalah on Motzei Shabbat, you get to make Havdalah the entire day. Notice what it says. You get the whole day, meaning the whole day is Sunday, but you don't get the whole week. Okay, which means you don't get till Tuesday. You only get Sunday according to the second reading. Okay, so that's a big difference. Again, most people by Sunday night have made Kiddush. It's not like it's the most common thing. My daughter once went to a Gan where they wanted to teach the kids Havdalah. So they would do Havdalah every Sunday in Gan. So, you could see. Okay. Before we move on to the next section, which is really my favorite section, I actually forgot that in the beginning of class, I wanted to just make a few announcements. So I'm stopping now and I'm going to make a few announcements, which is number one, we have the Siyum coming up. I just want to remind people on the English Siyum will be on Sunday, March 21st, and the Hebrew Siyum will be on Sunday, March 22nd. 8:30 Israel time. Pay attention to the time differences because in America, they've already changed the clocks. In Israel, they haven't. So it's a 6-hour time difference, not a 7-hour. First announcement went out with the wrong times. So thank you for all who corrected us. And I want to just remind people that we have this skills class. If you haven't yet joined, you can still join. There's 2 more classes left. This week, we're dealing with Afikomen. Next week, about matzah being a mitzvah nowadays. What's the mitzvah of matzah and maror nowadays? Is it different than it was in the time of the temple? And where we get to go much more in depth than we do in the Daf Yomi, and we get to focus on methodological skills that you can gain to help you learn Gemara. The whole course sits online and can always be accessible, and it's a great thing to do before the Seder to learn 1, 2, or 3, or 4 of the Shiurim if you want, or all of them. There's 10, and prep yourself for the Seder. And the other thing is, before the Siyum, we're having a drive like last time for women to take pictures of where do I learn Daf Yomi. So it's a bit different than last time. Pictures of, women learning in all different places while you're running, while you're doing laundry, while you're in the kitchen, while you're at work, wherever it might be. Take a picture, put it up on Facebook or in our WhatsApp groups, and you'll be part of a video presentation at the Siyum, and we'll get to see lots of women learning in all different kinds of ways. So I encourage you all to start doing it already today. Okay, it all has to be in by Sunday. So get it to us by this coming Sunday, by the 14th, and then you'll be in the movie. Okay, so let's get back to our sugya. Now here comes one of my favorite sugyas of Shas, and you'll see why in a few minutes. Okay, besides loving to teach Gemara, one of the things I really love is also development of halacha and how halacha develops, right? When I taught this class about this topic, I used to say it's like those things we did when we were little kids, and you'd have to take a word like ball and change it to star, and each time you change one letter and each time it has to be a word, but it kind of develops from one thing into something totally different. And this is an interesting sugya in that sense, where you're going to see that the base halacha doesn't really match what we do today. And the question is, how do we get from what the sugya is talking about to what the halacha is today? And we'll see some interesting sources where they also couldn't make heads or tails of it and said, what's going on here? And we couldn't figure it out. And I'll read you some interesting sources about it. So anyway, let's start. Amrle Mar Yenuka Umar Kashisha Bered Rav Chisda Rav Ashi. So Mar Yenuka and Mar Kashisha, the sons of Rav Chisda, said to Rav Ashi the following. So they tell the following story. They say, Amemar came to a place. The same Amemar we just mentioned 3 minutes ago. Below Havalan Chambra. And it came time for Havdalah. He was somewhere for Shabbat. Again, we see, right, this isn't just practical for us, but all these halachot were very practical for them, and we're constantly seeing stories that happen. He comes to a place and there was no wine. Aitina le shechra, so they bring him beer. Yeah. What does he do? Lo avdils. I'm not making Havdalah on that. I need wine. So we didn't make Havdalah. So what did he do? Well, we learned that you can't eat until you make Havdalah. So Batavat, he went to sleep that night without eating. Hopefully they fed him well over Shabbat and he wasn't starved. Lemachal, the next day, Trachna vaitina lechamra. They searched around and they found wine for him, and they brought him wine, nice way to treat their guests, right? They went out of their way, they found wine, they brought him wine, avdil v'tayin midi. So he made Havdalah and he ate, and then he ate. Lishana, now the next year, chu ikla la'atrin. Again, he gets to the same place. He happens to be maybe once a year, he goes to the same place. Lo havalan chamra. They didn't have wine again. Aitina shechra, and they give him beer. Now, what would you expect? You'd expect he remembered what happened last year. He remembered it took them a day to find it. So he'll starve himself for a day. He'll wait till they find wine and he'll do the wine. But that's not what happens. Amal, he says, ihachi, if that's the case, starts to put 2 and 2 together. He says, wait, last year I was here, you brought me beer. This year I'm here, you brought me beer again. So he says, chamar medinahu. If this is the case, ihachi, if this is true, that you now did this a second time, this must be chamar medina. Now, this is a very important word. What is chamar medina? And it's a question that many people ask, and there's no clear answer to this. It's, how do we get the definition from this story? What made him decide that this was chamar medina? And I'll explain to you what chamar medina is in a minute. Avdil v'tayim midi. So he makes Havdalah and he eats something. Now, what is chamar medina? So I see you're asking, did he have wine for Birkat Hamazon? Okay. It's not clear if he had wine at all. It seems like he probably didn't have wine for Birkat Hamazon, and it's not clear what he did for Kiddush either, right? Notice there's a lot of details missing from this story. So it's not so clear. It's a very good question. But the story is only about Havdalah, and that's all they're focusing on, so I can't tell you about anything else. But he says, now I can make Havdalah, and it's Chamar Medina. So what does Chamar Medina mean? So the Rashbam says, Chamar Medina is, Ein yayin acher ba'il hazot ki im shechal. Chamar Medina, literally the words mean, wine of the town or the state. okay, wine of the state. This must be your wine. He says, if you brought me this 2 years in a row, right? No, it's 2 weeks in a row almost because it was the last time I was here. It must mean that this must be what you consider wine, right? Now, the Rashbam says, this must mean that you don't have wine where you live. Now, there's a difference between not having wine and being able to, figure out a way to get wine. You notice last year they did find wine within a day's journey, right? They were able to find. But he says the fact that you don't have it must mean that you just don't have it in general. Even if it takes only a day to find, you don't need to, and you can make Havdalah on this. That's one way of reading it. The Rambam's definition is different. The Rambam says, Medina, I'm reading from the Mishnah Torah, Hilchot Shabbat Perek Kaftet. He says, Medina sherov yena shechal. A Medina, a country that most of its wine is beer. Okay, not that they don't have wine, okay, but that the wine that they drink, okay, you think about the difference between Germany and France, right? Germany, you could get wine, but many people drink beer much more so than, right? In France, it's always wine. So Germany would be a place where they have wine, according to the Rambam, but it would still be Chamar Medina because that's what they value, right? The fact that they brought it to him shows that's what they value in this place. They drink beer instead of wine. So it's unclear why, okay? The whole issue is going to be, what do we do going forward? Now, can we take from the story and assume that since he made Havdalah, we can make Havdalah? What about Kiddush? Can use it for Kiddush then? So there's still a lot of questions open here. So number one, what is Chamar Medina? Number two, what can we do with Chamar Medina? So far, all we've seen is Havdalah, not Kiddush. So now they say Shema Mina Tlat. You can learn 3 things from here, right? We had the Shema Mina Shmone, which we changed to 7, and then here we have our classic 3. You can infer 3 things from here. I want you to pay close attention to what they infer from here and what they don't. Shema Mina, Hamavdil b'tfilah tzarich she'avdil lakos. If you make Havdalah in shul, you have to also do it on a cup, because look at Amemar. He obviously went to shul and said Mariv, so the issue is that he now needs to wait until he had on a cup in order to be able to eat. We learn from here also that you can't eat until you make Havdalah because he waited. And you learn that if you didn't make Havdalah Saturday night, you could do it the rest of the week. It doesn't really teach you the rest of the week, but it teaches you that you could do it not necessarily that night because he waited and he did it the next day. Notice what's missing? That you can make Havdalah on Chamar Medina, which is the main thing that we read this story and want to come out of this story with, that you can make Havdalah on something else. So it's interesting they don't say that. Some people actually have the Shema Mina after the first year Amemar came. The Shema Minas appear there. You only learn it for the first part of the story, which would explain why you don't learn anything about Chamar Medina, because he hadn't figured it out at that point. Some people say that this is just focusing on aspects of the Havdalah bracha, not necessarily on what you can make Havdalah on. It's a bit of a question. Again, maybe it fits into, they really just wanted to get to that number 3, so they just didn't mention this. But anyway, it's a very good question. Now we're going to have some other questions. And again, this is a good classic example. Why do I like this? Because you can see how one sugya and the way you read it can be very different based on interpretation. That it all is based on how you read it and how you interpret it. So Bami, and you can get to if you read, you could read this question in 2 ways, and then you would come to a very, very different conclusion each way that you read it. Halachic conclusion, which is obviously very relevant. Bami Rav Huna me Rav Chisda. So Rav Huna asked Rav Chisda a question. I actually think they say it's really Rav Chisda asked Rav Huna, because Rav Chisda normally asks Rav Huna questions and not the reverse. So it should be Rav Chisda, Rav Chisda me Rav Huna. Ma'u l'kiddushay ashikra. Can you make kiddush on beer? Now, in which situation? Is this when beer is Chamar Medina, or is this when beer is not Chamar Medina? Now, that's going to be a huge difference if you read the question as when beer is Chamar Medina, when you don't have wine, or do we just mean even if you have wine, and then or even if that's not the main wine of the city, and then it's a very different conclusion. So we don't know what the question is. Okay, you can look at the Rashbam right away jumps in and says, Ma'u l'kiddushay ashikra bimkom she'ein yayin. He thinks we're clearly talking about a place where you don't have wine. So can you make kiddush? He reads this again. Maybe we'll just read it through his version, but know that there's a different way to read it. Can you make kiddush on beer when you don't have wine? Just like we just said a minute ago about Havdalah, you can. What about kiddush? So Amma, the answer he got was like this. Now, beer, you have to realize, means date beer. So we're now going to talk, date beer was the lowest of the lows of the beer. Okay, we're talking about different beers now. So date beer was considered the least significant because remember in Babylonia, they had tons of dates and it was very cheap. It was a very cheap drink. So Amal, he said the following, what about these other kinds of beers? Barley beer, fig beer, and mulberry beer. That about those beers, Rav, they asked Rav the following question, can you make Kiddush on it? Rav asked Rabbi Chia because he didn't know the answer. You see the whole shoshelet here, right? That Rav learned from Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Chia learned from Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. And he didn't answer him. Now, if you don't answer, you say, can I make Kiddush on something? And you don't get an answer, the answer is basically no, because I can't tell you yes, so the answer is no. So if on those better beers, he didn't answer him, can you make Kiddush on them? Shichra mebaya? Are you asking me about something even less significant than that? Of course you can't. Now, again, of course you can't what? Even if it's Chamar Medina, the way the Rashbam says it, or right? So then it would come according to the Rashbam. If you have no wine, you can use for Havdalah, something else, beer, but you can't use it for Kiddush. If you say this question is when it's not Chamar Medina, so you can't use beer if it's not your whatever you call Chamar Medina, right? Your wine of the area, but you could if it is, okay? In other words, if you don't have wine, then you could use it. So there's two different ways to read this. So now they say, Savromina, they inferred from this, they inferred from him that you can't make Kiddush, but he would obviously think that you could make Havdalah. But Amarlu, Rav Chisda, Hachi Amarav, Rav Chisda says, no, but Rav actually says, Kashem She'em Kachin Alav, Kachem Avdilim Alav. You can't make Kiddush and you can't make Havdalah. Again, big difference about if you read it as when it's Chamar Medina or when it's not Chamar Medina. If he's saying, even if it's Chamar Medina, the way the Rashbam reads it, then this sugya contradicts Amemar. Because Amemar's story, we get to the fact that you could make it on beer if it's Chamar Medina. And this sugya is saying, Rav saying, no, you can't, not Kiddush, not Havdalah. Okay, again, if you think it's not Chamar Medina, I hope I'm not confusing you too much, but I just want you to see that there's two ways to read the sugya. If you're saying it's not Chamar Medina, then it means like, it sounds like even you can even make Kiddush on it. Okay, remember, Amemar's story wasn't talking about Kiddush. We don't know what happened. It's actually strange because they really didn't have wine. Then what happened with Kiddush? We don't know. Okay, so it's a big question. Itmar Nami, it was also said, Amar Tachli Farber, Bimi Amar Shmuel, Kashem Shem Kachim Alav, Kachem Avdilim Alav. Not only Rav said this, also Shmuel. So again, we don't know what he means. Does he mean even if it's Chamar Medina, you can't even make Havdalah on it or not? It's not clear. Now we're going to have what I call, okay, so we had a story. Question is, do we learn from stories? And we did say a Shmami, now we can infer from the story, although we didn't say that we infer from it our halacha, which was a little strange. Then we have this question that was asked, and we're not sure, is it the same thing the story was talking about, or is it a different track? And it's talking about when it's not Chamar Medina, when you do have wine, or it's not the main wine of the city. And that's talking about both Kiddush and Havdalah, and it seems to say the halacha is the same for both. And it does say the halacha is the same for both, whereas the first sugya was only Havdalah. And now we're going to have what I call a bunch of subjective comments about beer in both directions. Those who seem to praise beer and those who seem to go against beer and say beer is a low-life drink. So Amar of Tachli Farber, Levi Shadro Le Rebbe, we're now going to have a story. Levi sends to Rebbe, Shichur Bar Tlei Samagame. He sends beer. There's two different ways of reading this. Either it was soaked 13 times or it was distilled. It was, or kind of went through a sifting process of 13 times, meaning it was a much better beer than the average. Tameh Havabasim Tuva, he drank it and wow, it was delicious. Amal, he says the following, you think he must have been a little drunk when he says this. Wow, drink like this, you could say all the praises you want in the world. Like, what a great drink. Okay. But what happens, which sounds like he's saying you can make Kiddush and Havdalah on this drink because it's such a great drink, which shows that there's subjectivity here. But then what happens, similar to the last time we saw someone drinking too much, right? That time he was eating too many dates. Okay, we see how the dates get to people, right? At night he got sick. Okay, it seems he had diarrhea from it. Amal miyaslan umefayes. Now, again, there's different ways to understand this. One opinion is he's saying, well, this is both a bad drink and a good drink, right? It's miyasran, it tortures me, and mefayes, it makes me feel good, right? It's got, like people who get drunk, it makes them feel totally sick, but yet they like the feeling, so they do it anyway. Some people say that it's like a question. He says miyaslan umefayes, and as he's taking back what he said before. He said, oh, you could say all this, she wrote it to Shpachot. And now they're saying, something that's miyasran, that tortures me like this, mifayes, I'm going to go and appease God with it and say a blessing, can't possibly be. So again, if you read it that way, then this seems to be saying, no way can you use beer for any kind of bracha. Amar Rav Yosef, Ador berabim de lo shichra. I want to take a public vow. A public vow can't be undone. Most vows can be. This one can't be, or unless under certain circumstances. I want to take a vow in public that I'm never going to drink beer. Because, okay, now this seems to be not connected to Kiddush at all. It's just, or Havdalah, it's just saying beer is a disgusting drink, or I don't want to be anywhere near it. Amar Rava, I'd rather drink flax water than drink beer. And again, they're talking about the date beer, and they're basically saying the date beer is, the worst of the worst, which again, maybe the sukkah is trying to tell you this. Make sure not to use this because it's really not a respectable drink. Rava says, this is a bit of a curse. Okay. Man de mekadesh ashichra. One who makes kiddush on date beer will be cursed that all his drinks will be date beer. You won't be able to afford anything else. You won't be able to access anything else. It's a curse. But after all those negative statements about date beer, all of a sudden we have a different kind of statement, which again, subjectivity, and it all depends on your situation. Rav eshkachel Rav Huna, de kadesh ashichra. That means that Rav Huna found Rav. He saw Rav, that Rav, now this is very strange, Rav made kiddush on beer. Now, didn't we just say before that Rav, he had asked for Bechia, right? And you couldn't make kiddush on beer. So again, maybe this is in a case where it's Chamar Medina and that wasn't. Some people, like Rabbeinu Hananel, and it shows up in the Dikdukei Sofrim, which is a book all about different versions, have a different version, and it's not Rav, it's somebody else. Okay, it's Rava finds, I forget who it is, but it's Rabba Bar Chana or Rabba Bar Huna. I think there's two different versions of who it is, but it's not Rav because it makes no sense they would be Rav. But anyway, however you read it, whoever it was made kiddush on beer. Amarle, so he says to him in response, Share Abba lemikne istere mishichra. Abba was a term of endearment for Rav, which actually supports the reading that it really was Rav. You are clearly making money off of beer, and therefore beer is important to you. And if beer is important to you, then you can use it for kiddush. So now we start to see again, we were going all in the direction, you can't, it's a terrible drink. But for certain people, this is their livelihood. And because of that, this beer is important to them. And because of that, they can actually use it for kiddush. So, and obviously then for Havdalah. So there seems to be different elements at play here. We have a story which seems to indicate you could do it if it's Chamar Medina. We have a question and a halachic answer, which is no, but it's not clear what that question was about. Then we have these stories about it being subjective. So when you go to look at a sugya like this and say, how do I paskin? It's incredibly confusing. Now the Gemara gets back to kind of more very pointed, saying it as it is, as opposed to kind of skirting the issue and saying all sorts of interesting things. Tanu Rabbanan, ein mekadeshin ela ala yayin. So he says you can't make kiddush only on wine. Ve'ein mevrachin ela ala yayin. This sounds very clear. Only wine, nothing else. Okay. Now there's two things here. It says kiddush and it says bracha. So now the Gemara says, you don't make a bracha on any other drink, on water or beer. Those are the main other drinks. You don't say shakol yebit baro. What do you mean you don't make a bracha on any other drink? That doesn't make any sense. Abai says this is what we mean. We don't say bring a cup to make a bracha like on Birkat Hamazon, only on wine. In other words, you can only use wine for a kosher bracha. That's what it means. Tanu Rabbanan, another braita. Again, it says you can't use beer. Now, again, one could understand these as blanket, no way. Or you could say only if you have wine. But if you don't have wine, or if it's Chamar Medina, if you go by the Rambam's interpretation, then maybe you can. So it's still not so clear from here what the halacha would be. Mishum, I hope I've confused you enough in terms of halacha l'maaseh here. That's what I'm trying to do, even though I know I don't like to confuse you, but I want to show you that it's very unclear. And then soon we're going to get to halacha l'maaseh. I'll make some order. Mishum Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon amru mekadshim. Okay, but in the name of Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, they said you can make kiddush on beer. Oh, all of a sudden we have this opinion that you can. So again, this sugya is incredibly confusing, and because it puts in different parts. Whenever you have a story, usually the story is pretty strong because if the rabbis actually acted on it, that gives you a lot of strength. On the other hand, when they say halacha, it's also pretty strong, and there's a lot of debate here what to say. So let's just look for starters at the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch says very simply, Bimkom she'ein yayin matzoi. The Shulchan Aruch takes the opinion of, it's interesting because often the Shulchan Aruch goes like the Rambam, but he takes the opinion of the Rashbam, that it's only when you don't have wine. Yesh omrim, so when you don't have wine, some say, okay, it's not even clear, right? Because it's a debate. So it depends on how you read the sugya. Some say shemekatshim al shecharu shar mishkim, that you can make kiddush on beer and other drinks. Chutz min hamayim, you just can't use water. The yesh omrim she'em mekatshim, and some people say no, you still can't use it for kiddush. Ula harosh. So now I specifically talked about kiddush right now because Havdalah, we know there are a lot of opinions, and really because of our Maimar's story, seems that there's a lot more leniency when it comes to Havdalah. But kiddush, a lot of these sources seem to be very clear that no kiddush. So now, this is something I mentioned yesterday, the Rosh. So the Rosh is quoted in the Shulchan Aruch. So what I want to get at is, why is the custom prevalent nowadays where kiddush in the morning, people will make on all sorts of liqueurs and whiskey and scotch and all that, but no one ever does that Friday night. Okay, at least I've never seen it, right? It's very uncommon. Everyone makes on wine or grape juice. So they say here you're going to see why. Ula harosh, and it connects with yesterday's sugya. If you don't have wine, in other words, he's saying the whole definition is when you don't have wine. So when you don't have wine, what do you do at night? Oh, you have a better option. You have bread. So make it on bread. But already, I told you this yesterday, in the morning, since it's just borei pri hagafen, right? And here we're going to read it inside. That's what we do at a kiddush. If someone makes on whiskey, they say a shahakol. You make a shahakol before your meal, and then it's clear that you're doing it for the purposes of kiddush, even though it's not borei pri hagafen. But if you make a bracha on bread first for your kiddush, ein kan shum shinoi. It looks like you're just making hamotzi because you're eating the meal, and it's not noticed. B'divrei tamim, and he says it's divrei tam, and not only that, the Rama says v'chein minhag pashu k'divrei harosh, and the minhag developed like the Rosh, where again, if you do, now I want you to be very clear about what he says. He doesn't say what we do today. He says if you don't have wine, then at night you make on bread. During the day you make on something else, the shahakol, presumably scotch, whiskey, something, beer, anything else that you have. But right now, what's the problem? The problem is that nowadays we all have access to wine. It's not so hard to get kosher wine. You have to remember, it wasn't always so easy to get kosher wine, but for them, for us, it's very easy to get kosher wine. So the Bach, who's living in the 1800s, okay, his Rabbi Yoel Sirkis, his commentary on the Torah, basically starts like this. Ika litmoa al minhag kol Yisrael. I have a big question on the minhag of all of Israel. They even have wine at home, and they make kiddush on something else. This is what many, many people do. He says, I don't understand it. And not only that, he goes on to say, and I just like these sources because they're interesting. They bring to life these halachic discussions. He says, when all the rabbis got together at their big rabbi conference, and they asked this question. This was the big question that was bothering them, right? You think about the questions that we discussed today. This is what was bothering them. Lama nahagukach. And as the big skinim that were there, and he quotes Rav Shmuel and all these great rabbis. They said about themselves they do it like this. Even though they have wine. No, you're waiting for an answer. He says there was really no conclusion. Nobody knew. Nobody knew the answer. And then Eliyahu Rabbah, which is Eliyahu Rabbah is an Achron. He says, Yoter nir Eli desamchu b'kiddush shacharit she'eino min haTorah. He tries to give an answer. He says, when it comes to kiddush in the morning, why are we more lenient? Because it's only d'Rabbanan. It also goes back to what we learned yesterday. Remember, the Ikar kiddush is at night, so that's why kiddush at night we stick with wine. But kiddush during the day, it's a different answer than the Rosh. Kiddush during the day, we can use something else because it's only rabbinic, so we can be more lenient. But seems like the real reason is a historical reason, which is that there were times where the Jews ended up without wine. And for generations, they couldn't get kosher wine, or it was super expensive or hard, or they lived in places where wine wasn't, right? They didn't grow grapes. So it was very hard to have wine. Because of that, right? In Israel, we all know there's vineyards everywhere, but in certain countries, there aren't at all. And as a result, they didn't have access to wine. What happens now? We're creatures of custom. So when they did finally get back to where they had wine, they were used to the custom of their parents, and they just continued what was always done. And that just became the custom. So now, when this is totally irrelevant, this custom that developed, we still keep the custom because That's what happened then, and we continue it now. And it happens in a lot of sugyot like that, and it's just very interesting, and that's why I wanted to point that out. Okay, so now we're going to move on. There's lots more to say there, but we're going to move on. So again, you can see from this sugya also why, again, not everyone agrees. Some people think Kiddush and Havdalah are the same, but there are those who distinguish between Kiddush and Havdalah, like the story of Amemar. He was clearly there for Kiddush, and they didn't say you could use something else for Kiddush. So therefore, one could say we're more lenient when it comes to Havdalah than we are with Kiddush. Okay, and then this whole question, how far can we go and what can you drink? And can you drink orange juice and Coke and all sorts of other things? That's a whole other topic. Okay, let's go on in our Gemara. Now we have a different topic, which is we saw before that you have to drink. Remember, one of the 8 things that they learned was you're supposed to drink from the wine. So they say, how much do you have to drink? Mat'emet yayin, we're about 7 lines from the bottom. Mat'emet yayin kol shehu. You can drink, taste wine, any amount. You can just drink a little bit of the wine and that's fine. Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda omer malo lugmav. No, you need a cheekful. Okay, you don't have to drink the whole revi'it of wine, but you do need to drink a cheekful. Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav v'chein tani Rav Gidol de Narash. Okay, so Rav Huna said the name of Rav, and also Rav Gidol from Narash said hamikadesh v'ta'am malo lugmav yatsa. You make kiddush and you drank malo lugmav. He said the same thing. You have to drink a cheekful of wine in order to fulfill your obligation. There's a minimum amount, not only that you have to make a cup of a bracha on, but also there's a minimum amount to what you need to eat. Bim lav lo yatzan. If you didn't do that, then you're not yotze. Now they mentioned this Rav Gidol from Narash. So Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, we're now going to have a bit of an issue with who he is. Ana tanina la. I taught it this way: Lo Gidol bar Menashe, but Lo Gidol bar Menyume, Ela Gidol Stama. I taught that it was just Gidol. It wasn't this Gidol bar Menashe that we know from somewhere else, and it wasn't Gidol bar Menyume. It was just Gidol. That was his name. So the Gemara asked, Lamai nafkamina, who cares what his name was, right? Why is it so important? So they say, Lemirma didei adidei. If we wanted to bring a contradiction and raise a contradiction and say, hey, you said this somewhere, and somewhere else you said something contradictory, and then we kind of say, well, one of those is wrong. If it's not the same Gidol, then it's not a contradiction, because we could say he says one thing and he says something else. So it's very important to know, right? Sometimes, when you're learning, sometimes you pay attention to the rabbis, sometimes you don't pay so much attention to the rabbis, but it's important to know who said what, because you can bring a contradiction, just like we saw in the sugya before, where Rav said something and then he said something contradictory. Was it really Rav or was it somebody else? And if it really is Rav, then we have to raise a question. He seems to contradict himself. Okay, we're done. Finished the whole topic of Kiddush. We're not done with today's stuff, but now we're moving back to our Mishnah. Remember our Mishnah? I don't know if you remember, but we started off Samach, right? Arei Pesachim or Erev Pesachim, lo Samach lemincha lo yochal adam ad shtechshach. From before mincha, you can't eat until it gets dark. So now we want to deal with Samach to which mincha are we talking about? There's mincha gdola, which is mincha could be recited from 12:30, from 6.5 hours into the day, or right from there till the end of the day. That's called mincha gdola. But the ideal mincha is to do it closer to the evening, which is from 2.5 hours toward the end of the day, from 9.5 hours into the day, which is about 3:30 on an average day. So now the Gemara wants to know, the students ask, which samuch lemincha is this? Remember, samuch means half an hour before. So is it 12 o'clock in the afternoon, or is it 3 o'clock in the afternoon that you can't eat? So they say, here are the two sides. Samuch lemincha gdola tnan umishum pesach. Is it because we want to make sure that you do the Korban Pesach? And when can you start doing the Korban Pesach? From midday, right? It's the afternoon. So really from 6.5 hours, but let's stop eating a half an hour before so that you don't get carried away and forget about dealing with the Korban Pesach. So is that the issue, which then would obviously make it irrelevant nowadays, right? Unless we just want to remember, but otherwise it's kind of irrelevant because we don't have a sacrifice anymore. And then it would obviously start much earlier because that's when you do the Korban Pesach. But also, by the way, if you already took care of your Korban Pesach, then theoretically you could eat after that, according to this reason. O Dilma, or do we say, Samuch lemincha tanatnan? Is it the later mincha? Umishum matzah. And then what would be the issue? It's because of matzah. What's the issue with matzah? Now this is different. If you remember, I pointed this out when we learned the Mishnah. The Rashbam there said it's a hidor mitzvah. We want you to eat it when you're hungry. It's like to make the mitzvah nicer. But that's not either of the options mentioned here. One of the options meant, right, the Rashbam kind of explained the Mishnah as the Mishnah, not the way the Gemara understood it. The Gemara understood it's either so that you don't forget to do the Korban Pesach, which is like many times we're forbidden to eat meals because you might forget to take care of something. Or is it a totally different issue because of matzah? And what's the issue with matzah? We're worried that you might eat matzah achila gasa. What does that mean? If you eat it on a full stomach, then it's disgusting to eat once you're already full. So that's like shoving food down your throat when you're not even hungry. That's not even called eating, to the extent that on Yom Kippur, there are those who say if you eat achila gasa on Yom Kippur, you eat a ton of food, you're actually not obligated, because that's not even called eating. Another ramification, a place where we saw achila gasa in Sudash Lishit. If it's the winter and the days are very short, and you want to eat your second meal just right after your first meal because you don't have enough time, by the time you finish lunch, it's already time to eat Sudash Lishit. There's an opinion that says you're exempt, because otherwise it's achila gasa. It's disgusting to eat more food. Okay, so that's not even called eating. And then you won't forget about Hidor mitzvah, the way the Rashbam said it'll be a better mitzvah. You're not even going to fulfill the mitzvah at all, because eating achila gasa is not eating, and this is an obligation of eating. So this obviously has to be balanced with this other issue, and this we're going to talk about in the skills class this week. We're learning about afikomen, which is this issue of eating the korban pesach ala sova. They specifically, when it came to the meat, and we learned this on Daf Ayin, that there's this issue of eating the korban pesach when you're satiated. So on the one hand, we want to get to the matzah and still be hungry, but when we get to the meat, you don't want to eat the meat in a ravenous way, because we're worried, and this is this balance between, and we'll see it at the end of today. So you're also between, on the one hand, wanting you not to be full from a big meal. On the other hand, we don't want you to be ravenous and eat in a crazy way, right? We want to kind of whet your appetite a little, and the whole idea of the korban pesach, eating ala sova, either because that's the way kings eat. They don't eat in a ravenous way, right? They're usually like Agrippas, who ate it 9 hours into the day and then ate again at sunset. So we want you to eat like kings on that night, or possibly because we don't want you to break bones, right? If you're hungry, you're going to break the bones and try to get the marrow out of the bones. So we don't want you to eat in a ravenous way. So there's a bit of this balance. The Pesach, where it's always, we don't want you to eat ravenously for whatever, those possible reasons about the Pesach. On the other hand, when it comes, and that's because it's a sacrifice, and sacrifices in general, you were supposed to eat them ala sova, when you're already satiated. But the matzah, you're supposed to eat and have an appetite for it. Maybe because it's not so appetizing. Maybe that's also why they wanted to make sure that you were ravenous, that you were hungry enough to eat it, that you ate it properly. So anyway, there's a bit of I just want to put it out there that there's, on the one hand, we want you not to eat. On the other hand, we want the Pesach, at least once you start eating that night. I think there's also more of a concern if you eat earlier, you'll be full when it comes time for the matzah. If once you're already in the meal that night, we're less concerned about it. So now, Amar Ravina, even though one could argue the other way, but that's what it seems from here. Amar Ravina. So we now want to get an answer to our question. Mincha Gedola, Mincha Ketana, which one is it? So Ravina says, Tashma, we're going to learn it from the following Tanaitic source. Afilu Agrippa Samelech, Shaya Ragil, okay, Agrippa the king, Shaya Ragil le'echol b'tesha shaot. He normally ate his meal. Sorry, we saw this, but we didn't see it. We're seeing it right now. He ate his meal 9 hours into the day. Okay, that's when he would eat his meal. Most people ate, we saw, in the morning hours or midday, and then at sunset. He would eat 9 hours into the day, and then again at sunset. So since he would eat normally at 9 hours, he basically missed his meal that day because it was in the time that it was forbidden. Now, now, if he's just keeping the halacha, we don't need a special thing to tell us this. Now, 9 hours, by the way, doesn't mean the same as we've been talking about. Samuch lemincha means then after 9 hours pass. He stopped into the 9th hour, which is before that. Okay, so now we understand, if you're saying the Isser kicked in exactly at 3 o'clock, he would stop into 2 and something, right? Like 2 and normally he would eat around 2 and something. He would stop then and wouldn't eat because it was getting close to the time where it was forbidden to eat. So that makes sense. But if you say that already from 12 o'clock it was forbidden, right? A few hours before that, it was already forbidden for him a few hours ago. So why would it be such a special chiddush that he didn't eat that day because he normally eats at 9 hours? So they say, therefore, but now, so therefore the assumption is it's samuch l'mincha ketana. And that's why Agrippas makes sense. But now the Gemara questions that and says it also doesn't make so much sense. If it's also no chiddush. If the Isra is going to kick in at exactly 3 o'clock, and he normally ate at 2 and 15 minutes or something. So we're not going to let him eat either because he's clearly going to be eating in the time that it's forbidden. So it's also not really such a chiddush. So they say, no, it is. Why? Because he normally ate at 9 hours and then would normally eat at nighttime. You might think that you might have thought that for him, the whole issue is we don't want you to eat achila gasa. right? That you ate too much now, and then you're not going to be able to eat at night. It won't be a regular meal. But every day he eats it 9 hours into the day, and then he eats 12 hours into the day at sunset. So he normally eats with a 3-hour difference. This, by the way, gives rise to the opinion that between meals is 3 hours, right? That for him, it was 3 hours in between meals in terms of waiting between milk and meat. So for him, he would normally eat that way. So maybe his meals, his eating habits are like our eating habits as if we ate in the morning that day. So maybe he'd be allowed to eat at 9 hours, even though nobody else can. And the Gemara, the Mishnah, the Breita is telling you, the Breita is saying, no, even he had to stop. Okay. And then again, it makes more sense if you say it's Mincha Ketana. And from that source, even though not exactly clear from that source, but they conclude that it must be only from the later afternoon and not from midday. Are you forbidden to eat? Now the question becomes, as I said, there's a bit of balance, because on the one hand, we don't want you to eat. On the other hand, we don't want you to be starving. First of all, sometimes if you don't eat at all, you're not really hungry. You lose your appetite. So we want you to somewhat whet your appetite for the evening. And as we all know, right, in whether you're in a house, right, usually you have some sort of meal late in the day because the Seder is going to go on a long time until you get to the food. Or if you're in a hotel, they always serve that meal for kids, and all the adults always show up because they also don't want to be starved when it comes to the Seder, right? That's always the meal they run out of food, even though every year they know that the grown-ups come, but it's one of those things. So Amar Rabbi Yossi, Aval matbilu b'minei targima. You can have other foods. Unclear what exactly minei targima is. Could be dessert kind of foods. It could be meat and things like that, but not mizonot type things. Okay, obviously matzah you can't eat because it's Erev Pesach. You're not allowed to eat matzah on Erev Pesach. Some people even now already, right, a month before don't eat matzah. But it's things made with matzah meal or something like that. Rabbi Yitzchak matbil b'yarkei. He would dip vegetables. Tanya Hachi, we're getting like recipes, what you should eat Seder afternoon, right? The afternoon before Seder. Tanya Nami Hachi, there's a Breita to support that. Hashamash matbil b'bnei me'ayim v'notnan lifnei orchim. This is great because there's two very interesting explanations here. The shamash can dip the innards, the inner parts of the animals, of the meat, and he would give it to the guests. Now, it's not clear, does he give it to the guests at night? Or does it mean he gets to taste the food in the kitchen? That's what one of the opinions is, that we allow him to do this. And it's interesting. I'll just read the sugya like this, and then I'll explain it the other way. Even though there's no proof from a pasuk it references it somewhere in a verse. You should thresh, you should plow a soft, like a ground that's soft and easy to plow, and don't plant where there's kotzim, where there's thorns and stuff, because it won't grow well. So what are they saying here? A cook is not going to cook well if you don't allow him, if you torture him and don't let him taste his food. So let him taste his food, or her taste her food, so that so that they'll enjoy what they're doing in the kitchen and do a good job, right? We all know what it's like to not be able to cook on a fast day or something. It's miserable. So anyway, that's a cute thing. Some people say it means no. He gives it to the guests in the afternoon so that they can eat. And then again, they come to the Seder prepared. That's what the Niur Lachem Nir, so that you've whet your appetite and you're ready to eat the food. Rava Havashate Chamra Kula Yom de Pesach. He would drink wine all Erev Pesach. Again, to get it, whet his appetite. So he'll be more interested in eating matzah. You see, I really think that they were concerned people wouldn't want to eat matzah. It's just not tasty, right? So they wanted people to be hungry to eat matzah. How do we know that drinking wine whets your appetite? We'll just go on a little bit further. You can drink between all the 4 cups, except for ben shlishi l'revi'i lo yishteh. We'll see this in tonight's class. If you come to the skills class, you can't drink between the 3rd and the 4th. Now, but you can drink between the earlier cups. And that's because it's after the afikomen, and that's a whole interesting sugya of itself. And if you say misad say that it whets your appetite, it fills you up and makes you too full, how do we allow you to do that before you finish? So if you're going to drink before, let's say cup 1 and cup 2, and you can drink more wine, and then you only get to the matzah after, and it fills you up, then you won't be able to do that. So therefore, it must be that it whets your appetite, and that's why they allowed you to drink more wine. Not that I recommend drinking more wine than 4 cups that night, but there are people who can hold their wine much better than me. But basically, the assumption here is that it whets your appetite. Again, this is more like recipe books, and how do foods affect different people, and what can you do with different foods. It's not exactly, it's somewhat halachic, but not exactly such a halachic sugya, this end part. Okay, with that, we'll finish for today, and we will pick up tomorrow on our next, more continuing now in Pesach. Okay, we get to Isha Chashuvah tomorrow, honor of Women's International Women's Day, right? All about women and women. Can they recline? What if they're important? What are important women? What comes under that? Very interesting topic. Shiur and Chamutal also this week on Daf Mishalahen talk about Isha Chashuvah. So you can either watch it before tomorrow's class or maybe you want to watch it after. Okay, have a great day, everybody.